Napoleon Bonaparte once stood looking toward the distant east and uttered a prophecy that would echo through the centuries. He said, "Let China sleep, for when she wakes, she will shake the world." Tonight, as the world outside your window grows quiet and the heavy burdens of the day begin to fade away, I invite you to pull your blanket a little tighter. Let your shoulders drop, close your eyes, and allow the steady rhythm of my voice to carry you back in time. We are not traveling to a battlefield of clashing swords or roaring cannons. Instead, we are going to witness a silent, profound awakening that slowly, inevitably, altered the very axis of our planet. History is a long river, and sometimes the most terrifying currents are the ones that make no sound on the surface. Imagine the bitter cold wind sweeping across the vast, frozen plains of northern China in the late 1970s. Try to feel the biting chill in the air, carrying the faint, metallic scent of burning coal and damp earth. If you were standing there, looking out over the horizon, you would not see the glittering skyscrapers of glass and steel that pierce the clouds today. You would not hear the hum of electric vehicles or the invisible pulse of advanced networks. There was only a profound, heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic, mechanical creaking of millions of heavy iron bicycles rolling over uneven dirt roads. Picture a sea of people, moving like a slow tide in the morning mist. Men and women, young and old, all dressed in identical faded grey and navy blue tunics. Faces worn by decades of hardship, eyes looking down, pedals turning endlessly under a pale, unforgiving sun. This was a nation exhausted by internal turmoil, isolated from the global stage, and seemingly trapped in an agrarian slumber that would never end. The fields were vast, but the harvest was meager. The rivers were wide, but the boats were empty. To the outside observer, it was a land frozen in time, a sleeping giant wrapped in a thick, impenetrable blanket of poverty. Meanwhile, let your mind drift across the vast, dark expanse of the Pacific Ocean to a completely different world. It is the same era, yet it feels like a different century. In the United States of America, the night sky was not illuminated by the moon, but by the blinding, electric neon glow of Times Square. The air vibrated with the roar of powerful car engines, the jazz from late-night radios, and the relentless energy of a society running on the high-octane fuel of the American dream. They had already sent men to walk on the dusty surface of the moon. Their factories were churning out televisions, washing machines, and the early blueprints of the personal computer. The West was confident, vibrant, and victorious. When the strategists in Washington looked across the ocean toward the east, they did not see a threat. They saw only a poor, backward, agricultural society. They assumed the dragon would remain asleep forever, irrelevant to the glorious march of Western progress. Why would the eagle, soaring high above the clouds, fear a creature that had not even opened its eyes? But history is full of ironies. The greatest empires often forget that power is never static. It is a fluid, shifting entity. While the West measured time in rapid, 4-year political cycles and quarterly financial reports, the East possessed a vastly different internal clock. They measured time in dynasties. They measured time in centuries. Beneath the surface of that grey, impoverished society, a different kind of energy was quietly gathering. It was the energy of survival. You see, the people of this ancient land carried a heavy, invisible weight upon their shoulders. It was the bitter memory of what they called the century of humiliation. They remembered the foreign gunboats tearing through their rivers, the unequal treaties signed at the barrel of a gun, the slow carving up of their once proud empire by outsiders. That pain was not forgotten. It was swallowed. It was buried deep within the collective soul of a billion people, transforming into a silent, cold determination. They possessed a terrifying level of patience, the kind of patience that allows a person to endure absolute indignity today for the promise of a different tomorrow. They were willing to swallow their ancient imperial pride, to bend their backs, and to start from less than nothing. They were not merely sleeping in the dark. They were enduring. They were waiting. Just like a tiny, insignificant seed buried deep beneath a thick layer of heavy winter snow. The snow is freezing, the earth is hard, and to anyone walking above, the ground appears completely dead. But deep inside that seed, a slow, violent biological process is happening. It is quietly conserving every ounce of its energy, waiting for the precise moment when the first drop of spring rain touches the soil. The world thought they were broken, but they were simply biding their time, hiding their brightness, and waiting for the right moment to open the door to the outside world. And when that door finally creaked open, just a fraction of an inch, the course of human history was forever changed. The tall concrete chimneys began to rise, piercing through the cold, damp night air, and the massive, rusted gears of history started to slowly, inevitably turn. If you were to close your eyes and listen closely to the echoes of the early 1980s, you would no longer hear the quiet rustling of dry wheat in the fields. Instead, a new, hypnotic rhythm was emerging along the muddy coastlines of the East. It was the sound of a sleeping dragon beginning to stretch its heavy limbs. Try to visualize a small, forgotten fishing village named Shenzhen, sitting quietly by the dark, salty water of the Pearl River Delta. For centuries, the only sounds there were the gentle crashing of waves against wooden boats, the repairing of torn fishing nets, and the low, tired voices of men returning from the sea. The air smelled of salt, raw fish, and wet timber, but in the blink of an historical eye, that quiet village was swallowed by a storm of concrete and steel. The muddy paths were paved over with thick, dark asphalt. The wooden huts were violently torn down to make way for massive, rectangular concrete boxes that stretched as far as the eye could see. These were the early factories, cold and imposing, standing like silent fortresses under the pale moonlight. Inside these towering concrete walls, a new kind of army was being assembled. Not an army carrying rifles or marching into battle, but an army of millions of young men and women migrating from the impoverished countryside. They left behind their quiet, starving villages, carrying their meager belongings in cheap woven plastic bags. They stepped into the deafening, echoing halls of the manufacturing plants. Imagine the sheer physical weight of millions of human beings moving in absolute synchronization. Listen to the endless, metallic clattering of tens of thousands of sewing machines, moving up and down, like the rapid heartbeat of a new era. The air inside these factories was thick, heavy with the suffocating smell of synthetic fabric, burning plastic, and human sweat. Under the harsh, flickering glare of fluorescent lights, they sat for 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. Their hands, calloused and bruised, moved with terrifying speed and precision. They were cutting, stitching, assembling, and soldering. They were making the plastic toys that Western children would unwrap on Christmas morning. They were stitching the denim jeans that teenagers in New York would wear. They were putting together the intricate, tiny circuit boards of early electronics. And they did all of this in absolute silence, absorbing the toxic fumes, accepting the physical exhaustion for wages so incredibly small that the Western world could hardly comprehend it. To the wealthy businessmen sitting in their high-rise glass offices in London, Tokyo, and Wall Street, this was nothing more than a magnificent, highly profitable arrangement. The West looked down at the East with a sense of comfortable superiority. They saw a vast, desperate population, willing to poison their own rivers and darken their own skies, just to manufacture cheap goods for the global market. The Western strategists smiled, believing they had found the ultimate docile servant. They threw their spare change across the ocean, confident that the East would remain forever chained to the bottom of the global supply chain, forever the world's humble, obedient factory. But they failed to see the profound, terrifying philosophy operating beneath the surface of that obedience. The East was practicing an ancient, strategic art. Hide your strength and bide your time. They were not just trading their sweat for foreign currency, they were trading their sweat for knowledge. With every single container ship that docked at their newly built, massive concrete ports, they did not just unload raw materials, they unloaded blueprints. They unloaded engineering manuals, manufacturing protocols, and the fundamental secrets of Western industrialization. They allowed the foreign corporations to build factories on their soil, but in return, they quietly, methodically studied every single machine, every single patent, and every single process. It was the greatest, most silent transfer of wealth and knowledge in human history. They were like a dry, cracked sponge, plunged into an ocean of information, absorbing every single drop of technological know-how without making a single ripple on the water's surface. They accepted the pollution, they accepted the condescension, they swallowed their pride and played the role of the cheap laborer perfectly, all while quietly building their own roads, their own power plants, and their own massive infrastructure to support the future they had already planned in their minds. If you imagine a bird's-eye view of the Pacific Ocean during those decades, you would see thousands of colossal, heavy cargo ships cutting through the deep, dark blue water. These massive steel leviathans, weighing hundreds of thousands of tons, were loaded with brightly colored shipping containers piled high like steel mountains. They were moving continuously, day and night, forming an unbreakable, physical bridge between the two hemispheres. The water displaced by their massive hulls created slow, rolling waves that crashed against the distant shores. Slowly, invisibly, the center of global gravity was shifting. The wealth, the manufacturing capacity, and the very foundation of the modern world's economy were flowing eastward like a quiet, unstoppable river. The West continued to sleep peacefully in its bed of accumulated wealth, unaware that the foundation of their house was being quietly disassembled and rebuilt on the other side of the planet. The sleeping dragon had not just opened its eyes. It was already breathing, its lungs filling with the smoke of thousands of factories, preparing for a monumental leap that no one saw coming. The one who had obediently copied the world's technology for decades suddenly woke up one cold morning, not as a humble student, but as the one quietly rewriting the rules of the global game. Imagine the sheer, terrifying speed of this transformation. They did not simply walk through the traditional, slow stages of the old industrial revolution. They sprinted. They skipped entire chapters of modern history, launching themselves straight from the dusty factory floors into the blinding, invisible realm of the future. Picture the vast, empty expanses of the Gobi Desert. For thousands of years, the only movement there was the slow, agonizing shifting of golden sand dunes under the crushing weight of the dry wind, and the occasional, silent footprint of a lone traveler. The air was incredibly dry, tasting of ancient dust and isolation. But now, rising from that ancient, desolate landscape, stand towering, futuristic structures of steel and glass. These are no longer factory chimneys belching thick black smoke into the sky. These are the slender, metallic spines of advanced 5G transmission towers, silently pulsing with invisible, high-frequency waves. They stand like quiet sentinels in the barren wasteland, beaming an unseen web of connectivity, linking the most remote, forgotten corners of the Earth directly to a massive, pulsating digital brain in the sprawling megacities. Listen to the sound of their new progress. It is no longer the deafening, chaotic clatter of 10,000 sewing machines or the heavy, exhausting thud of iron hammers. It is a profound, chilling silence. It is the eerie, almost unnatural quiet of a pristine white bullet train. Sleek, aerodynamic, and heavy, it slices through the thick, freezing midnight fog at over 300 kilometers per hour. If you were sitting inside one of these cabins, leaning your head against the cool double-glazed window, you would feel no shaking. You would hear no rattling of old, rusted tracks. There is only a smooth, frictionless, ghost-like glide across thousands of miles of elevated concrete bridges that pierce through mountains and span across impossibly wide rivers. They have built a sprawling, metallic web of veins across their vast continent, moving millions of people and unimaginable mountains of cargo with a quiet, ruthless efficiency. It is an engineering marvel so massive in its scale that it leaves the older, decaying empires watching in stunned, heavy disbelief. To truly understand this phenomenal, almost unnatural acceleration, you must look deep into the psychological scars of their past. The driving force behind this relentless, exhausting push was not merely a superficial desire for economic wealth. It was something far deeper, far more primal, burning quietly in the dark. It was the unhealed wound of what they call the century of humiliation. The bitter memory of foreign powers dictating their fate, dividing their lands, and breaking their pride was a heavy, suffocating blanket that they collectively refused to wear ever again. This shared historical trauma slowly hardened. It forged an iron will, a cold, calculating determination that permeated the sterile air of every university laboratory, every deep tech startup, and every silent political chamber. Imagine stepping into one of their newly built, hyper-advanced semiconductor facilities. The air inside is artificially cooled, perfectly filtered, smelling faintly of ozone and pure alcohol. Rows upon rows of engineers, their faces hidden behind immaculate white cleanroom suits, move like silent, focused ghosts under the harsh, shadowless glow of LED lights. They are no longer pouring molten steel or stitching cheap fabrics. They are etching microscopic, impossibly complex circuits onto fragile wafers of pure silicon. They are drawing invisible maps of power that are smaller than a single human cell. In vast, windowless server farms, hidden deep within hollowed-out mountains, rows of supercomputers hum with the deep, resonant, low-frequency vibration of 1,000,000 cooling fans. They are training artificial neural networks, processing oceans of data at a speed that the human mind simply cannot fathom. The sheer intellectual weight of 1,000,000,000 minds, shifting their focus from basic survival to absolute technological dominance, is a force of nature. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the western sun, which had shone so brightly and proudly for over a century, was beginning to cast long, uneasy shadows. The old empires slowly opened their heavy, complacent eyes. The sudden realization hit them not like a loud explosion, but like a slow, creeping drop of freezing water running down the spine of a sleeping giant. The geopolitical establishment in Washington and London felt a sudden, breathtaking chill. The humble, quiet laborer who used to sit in the smog, assembling their plastic toys and stitching their shoes, was now successfully launching robotic rovers to the dark, uncharted side of the moon. The student was no longer just catching up in the rearview mirror. The student was beginning to pave the very road that the entire world would soon have to walk on. The West realized, with a deep, heavy, sinking feeling in the pit of their stomachs, that the absolute technological superiority they had taken for granted, their unquestioned, golden crown, was quietly, inevitably slipping through their fingers like dry sand. The unipolar world was fracturing in absolute silence. More than 2,000 years ago, an ancient Greek historian named Thucydides observed a terrifying, inevitable pattern in the slow, grinding machinery of human power. He wrote that when a rising power threatens to displace an established ruling empire, the resulting friction creates an almost inescapable pull toward conflict. Tonight, as you lie in the quiet, safe comfort of your room, feeling the heavy blanket resting softly over your chest, try to visualize this ancient trap slowly closing its massive iron jaws over the vast, dark expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The challenger has finally stepped out of the historical shadows, and the ruler, the great American eagle, has fixed its sharp, unblinking, anxious gaze upon the eastern horizon. The air between them has grown incredibly dense, heavy with the unspoken tension of a rapidly shifting world order. This is not a war, announced by the deafening roar of supersonic fighter jets tearing through the midnight sky, or the terrifying, rhythmic rumble of heavy steel artillery shaking the damp earth. There are no deep, muddy trenches dug into the frozen ground, and no exhausted soldiers marching blindly under the pouring rain. The battleground of this new, modern era is profoundly, deeply silent. It is a war fought in the quiet, heavily air-conditioned rooms of corporate headquarters, in the sterile, airless chambers of advanced semiconductor laboratories, and in the thick, mahogany-paneled corridors of absolute political power. Listen closely to the wind outside your window and realize that you will not hear the sound of explosions in this conflict. You will only hear the quiet, deliberate scratching of a gold fountain pen across a thick piece of official parchment in the Oval Office, signing away decades of global free trade in a single, irreversible stroke. You will hear the soft, almost imperceptible clicking of computer keyboards as heavy, invisible digital walls are suddenly erected across the vast, unseen infrastructure of the global internet. Imagine the sheer, suffocating weight of a massive, invisible blockade, slowly tightening its grip around the neck of the rising Eastern giant. The Western superpower, feeling the cold, uncomfortable breath of the challenger on its neck, began to systematically deploy its most sophisticated, silent weapons. They did not drop heavy iron bombs on sleeping cities. Instead, they dropped massive, crushing economic tariffs on thousands of heavy steel shipping containers that were slowly, steadily crossing the dark ocean waters. They deliberately severed the invisible, microscopic lifelines of advanced silicon chips, the very fragile nervous system of the modern technological age. They attempted to choke off the supply of the ultraviolet lithography machines, massive, incredibly intricate devices, the size of city buses that use lasers to carve microscopic pathways of light into pure silicon. Without these machines, the brilliant, ambitious engineers of the East would be left staring at empty, useless wafers, their immense technological leap abruptly frozen in time and space. To truly understand the depth of this silent containment, you must look deep into the profound, existential anxiety of the reigning empire. For nearly a century, ever since the grey dust settled over the ruined, smoking cities of the Second World War, the West had sat comfortably upon the highest, golden throne of global dominance. They had confidently written the heavy, leather-bound rulebooks of international trade and diplomacy. They had built the massive, complex banking systems that pumped the financial lifeblood through the veins of the entire global economy. Their green currency was the unquestioned, absolute anchor of the world. And now, for the first time in modern memory, they were staring across the ocean at a power that did not just want a humble seat at the table, but was quietly, systematically building an entirely new table from scratch. The deep fear echoing through the marble halls of Washington was not merely a superficial worry about losing a few abstract percentage points of economic growth. It was a profound, cold, creeping terror of losing the very architecture of reality that they had so carefully built. If the center of the world drifted inevitably eastward, what would happen to the proud legacy of the American century? This agonizing, sleepless realization forced the aging eagle to spread its massive, heavy wings, attempting to cast a dark, suffocating shadow over the sprawling technological ambitions of the East. They pulled their global allies closer, quietly weaving a tight, restrictive diplomatic net across the ocean, desperately trying to trap the dragon before it could fully take flight and eclipse the sun. But the dragon, having finally tasted the intoxicating, undeniable power of absolute self-reliance, completely refused to be pushed back into the dark, quiet, impoverished slumber of the past. The heavy, crushing pressure from the West did not break their collective spirit. Instead, it acted as a massive, high-pressure forge, compressing their national will into something harder, denser, and far more dangerous than before. The more the invisible technological walls closed in around them, the more intensely the research foundries of the East burned in the quiet, sleepless night. They poured hundreds of billions of dollars and the exhausted, relentless efforts of millions of brilliant minds into breaking the silicon blockade, determined to build their own independent universe of technology. The world now holds its breath, caught in the agonizing, slow-motion collision of these two massive geopolitical tectonic plates. The pressure is building deep beneath the fragile surface of the global economy, groaning under the sheer, unimaginable weight of this silent struggle. The West is pushing down, with all of its accumulated historical might, desperate to freeze the hands of the clock, while the East is pushing upward with the desperate, unstoppable, boiling momentum of a billion souls seeking their rightful historical place in the sun. There is no loud, cinematic climax yet, only the continuous, grinding, exhausting tension of two giants wrestling silently in the dark. A quiet war of attrition that is slowly, permanently, and irreversibly altering the very fabric of our shared human reality. Let us step back now. Pull your perspective far away from the glowing screens, the heavy cargo ships, and the silent, cold semiconductor foundries. Imagine floating high above the Earth, in the absolute, freezing silence of deep space. Look down at the fragile, glowing blue marble, spinning slowly, silently, in the infinite dark. From this breathtaking, terrifyingly quiet vantage point, there are no borders drawn on the land. There is no east, and there is no west. There is no righteous defender of the old order, and there is no malicious challenger seeking to destroy it. There are only vast, slow-moving currents of human history, shifting across the continents like the heavy, ancient tectonic plates, hidden deep beneath the crushing weight of the dark oceans. What we are witnessing today, this agonizing, tense struggle between the American eagle and the Eastern dragon, is not an anomaly. It is not an unprecedented disaster. It is simply the natural, inevitable rhythm of a world that is constantly breathing, growing, and quietly shedding its old skin. Think back to the heavy, crumbling white marble pillars of ancient Rome. They too believed their glorious, sun-drenched empire would last until the absolute end of time. They built massive, impossible stone roads and towering aqueducts, confident that the geopolitical center of the world would never, ever shift away from their magnificent, bustling city. But the long, quiet river of time kept flowing, washing away their absolute military power, leaving only beautiful, melancholic ruins buried under centuries of soft, silent dust. Think of the mighty British Empire, whose heavy, ironclad warships once dominated every single ocean, casting a massive, intimidating shadow over the entire globe. The sun was never supposed to set on their vast, wealthy dominion. Yet, the heavy iron wheel of history turned again, slowly, inevitably, and the center of global gravity drifted across the cold, dark Atlantic water to the neon-lit, ambitious shores of the New World. Every single empire that has ever existed on this earth is like a massive, magnificent living organism. They are born in the freezing cold of hardship. They grow with fierce, hungry determination. They reach a breathtaking, golden peak of absolute power, and eventually, inevitably, they grow tired. They grow heavy. The metal rusts, the stones crack, and they must quietly make way for the next chapter of the human story to be written. The deep anxiety we feel today, the heavy, suffocating fear of a rapidly changing world order, is merely the physical friction of this massive, historical wheel turning once more in the dark. The eagle in the west is not evil for wanting to fiercely protect the peaceful, prosperous nest it has built over the last century. It is simply acting on the primal, deeply ingrained biological instinct of survival, terrified of the long, cold shadows creeping across its borders. And the dragon in the east is not malicious for wanting to finally stretch its heavy, cramped wings after a century of bitter humiliation and silent, exhausting physical labor. Both giants are simply playing their destined, unavoidable roles on the vast, ancient stage of human history. They are trapped in a slow, elegant, and terrifying dance of power that has been repeated 1,000 times before we were born and will be repeated 1,000 times after we return to the quiet, damp earth. So tonight, as you lie in the comforting, intimate darkness of your room, I want you to let go of the heavy burden of the world. The grand, geopolitical struggles of massive superpowers, the invisible, silent wars of silicon and global trade, the unstoppable shifting of the world's wealth. All of these massive, earth-shattering events are entirely beyond your control. And in the grand, infinite, sweeping scale of cosmic time, they are nothing more than a brief, quiet whisper in the autumn wind. Feel the soft, warm weight of your blanket resting heavily against your tired shoulders. Listen to the slow, steady, hypnotic rhythm of your own breathing. Inhale the cool air and exhale the tension, your chest rising and falling, exactly like the gentle, rhythmic waves of a calm, midnight ocean washing against a quiet shore. Your personal anxieties, the stressful deadlines of your daily life, the small, bitter conflicts that troubled your mind today, they are just like tiny, insignificant grains of sand, resting peacefully at the bottom of the long, deep river of time. The river will keep flowing, and the sand will eventually, peacefully wash away into the great, quiet void. You are completely safe here, in this quiet, warm space. The massive empires outside your window will continue to rise and fall. The center of the world will continue to violently shift. But tonight, none of that matters. All that matters is the deep, restorative, dreamless rest that your heavy body and exhausted mind so desperately need. Let the echoes of the past fade into a soft, comforting hum. If this quiet journey through the shadows of history tonight has brought you a small moment of peace, I humbly invite you to leave a subscription to this channel. Let this be our secret, quiet sanctuary away from the deafening noise of the modern world. Close your weary eyes now. Let your mind drift away on the gentle, dark currents of the past. I wish you a beautiful, deep sleep, and we will meet again in another era, another time. Tomorrow night. Good night.